All right. We are back in the Ex-Homeschooler Club today. I am, of course, your host, Jacob Gooden, and today I am joined by my friend, Elizabeth. Uh, we have known each other I feel like I've known your family for a very long time. I knew your brother,
Yeah.
John, probably before you, but you were a few years younger than I was, more better friends with my sister, probably. But I'm just going to say right now, as of the recording of this, you have been the biggest fan of the podcast so far, and so I for sure had to have you on.
Yay.
Um, but but you have an interesting homeschool story, and I wanted to highlight it. So, give me a little something. What did your homeschool journey look like? Was it all the way through? Um, you know, tell me a little bit about it.
Right. So I have two other biological siblings that I think they were both homeschooled all the way through. I'm the youngest by a lot. And then I have two adopted siblings that became homeschooled, but I was homeschooled from the very beginning up until the age of 16 when I was a junior in high school. And that's when I started doing a bunch of different things other than just like straight homeschooling.
So was that because you were like, I I mean, we talked beforehand a little bit about this. You were starting to do college courses. You were doing some extracurricular stuff that required you to do to actually be like you're one of the lucky ones. You got to go to public school a little bit, even though it was independent
Yeah.
study. But what did that like transition kind of look like? What all was going on?
Right. I can't remember the exact reasons why I started to do all these types of schools. So the story was like I wanted to do track and field and cross country. And what better way to do that through a public school? So I kind of tried out at my local high school, and I remember the girls were a little bit catty. So then I tried another high school, and in order to be on the team, I had to be in the public school system. So I started doing independent studies. And the independent studies was at the community college, Oxnard Community College, which I was already going to at the time. So it was kind of just like a perfect fit. The high school was across the street. So I would go to my classes and then walk over, go to my track and field practice. And for a little bit, I was doing the whole community college, public school, track and field, independent studies, and homeschooling. And then that was just too much for me. So I dropped the homeschooling bit, and I ended up graduating from the independent studies system, which is the public school system. And I'm really grateful I did because the principal really liked me, and she articulated all of my homeschool courses to public school like codes. So my transcript was in the format that was really nice to apply for universities. And I feel like that really gave me a leg up because I was so worried about that in high school.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest fears I think a lot of homeschoolers have, especially ones that are looking to go to college right
Mhm.
afterwards. Is like, what does the transcript thing look like? And I know even for parents, it's like it was worrisome, like how does it get formatted and how this, that, and the other. And it's like, it's a lot of. I mean, I had a conversation with my mom the other week, and I was asking her this
Yeah.
stuff, and she's like, it's a whole education within itself to try to figure out how to like format all this stuff, and homeschools in California are recognized as private schools, so
Hmm.
they're legitimate, education system. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's like getting everything right for the college level is like is wild. And I remember even when applying for colleges, and maybe you had this too, was like they would they would be like, oh, we also need this form or we need this other little
Hmm.
thing. Like, I mean, you kind of
Yeah.
got lucky because you had some of that transition for you in high school, but
Right. It was really, it was a hard transition though, because I remember getting ready to start doing the whole process of applying to university. And my parents, um, I think, the only kid that they were really like willing to let go to university straight out of high school because I was super passionate about what I wanted to study. And so they were like, okay, you don't have to do the 2 years of community college and get your AA. Like, you can just like go do straight shot to university. Um, but I remember preparing all that, like the SAT, the ACT. That was the first time I was in a public school classroom. And I remember walking on the campus and just like fear rolling over me because it was like a dungeon. Like the gates are like a prison. They like lock them. You have to check in the office. And I was so dismal. And I'm like just shivering in my little chair. They're so tiny with all these other students. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what people do every day.
I love hearing that from somebody else because yeah, I felt the same way. Like I did the SAT multiple times. I'm sure you
Me
probably
too.
did as
Yeah.
well. And I did the ACT because I had sort of also looking at outside of like going outside of the state for college, which is what I
Mhm.
ended up doing. But like, and so ACT is accepted at a lot more out of state colleges. SAT was like big for California schools, but um, yeah, but I remember going in and just being like, I remember, yeah, being so freaked out. And then I felt like everybody else knew each other. And so breaks would come and
Yeah.
I was just the odd man out. And I was just standing there eating my little snack while we're on break for 10 minutes or whatever between segments.
Yeah.
And just like, oh my gosh, like, and feeling dumb the entire time too. Just feeling like I don't have this, like, you know?
Yeah, I wanted to, like I remember my mom took me to, like, Olive Garden or, like, some soup kitchen afterwards, and I just wanted to puke because it was just such an overwhelming experience to be in the environment. I feel like I wish I was just, like, taken through a tour of the school first, and then, like, my testing experience would have been better. And I'm sure, like, all the public school kids were, like, also freaking out, but at least they're used to sitting in that classroom. It was just so crazy. Like I remember for track and field was the first time I was on a public school campus and I had never seen like all the lockers. It was like a movie. I was like, so this is what goes on. Like I like couldn't stop staring at everything and I was just like a sore thumb sticking out.
Yeah, no, I feel ya because even though I had gone to public school previously, it
Mhm.
had been so long since that it was so different for me. So yeah, like first grade going to public school is like way different than going in high
Oh
school,
yeah.
right? And oh my gosh, it's like foreign. But yeah, I agree. Like having a walkthrough and then like I mean, tests too are just like in general, no fun, right? And then also you're
Right.
taking a test that is going to help dictate what colleges you get into. That's
Right.
stressful. And I'm thankful my mom put me in a critical thinking class before I took these tests because the SAT, the ACT, not quite as much, but the SAT is like critical theory based testing.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
don't actually have to know the answer. Like you don't actually have to know math science. Like you just have to know how to look at a question and determine what the answer is not.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
so I was thankful she did that because yeah, there was a lot of things that I was like, I am not smart enough to know what this is.
Yeah. But okay, I don't know if this is just me. That was my first time taking a standardized test, and I had never used a Scantron before, so the Scantron was even, like, terrifying to me. I was like, "Oh my god, there's so many bubbles, like, what is this?" But yeah.
I think I had done a couple in the past. I remember doing them in grade school a few times, and I think it mostly
Mhm,
was I know within the homeschool group or some homeschool group in California, they did offer some standardized testing.
mhm.
So I wasn't totally shooketh. I wasn't shooketh
Shook it.
by that. Um, but yeah, I think it mostly had to do with my mom just wanted to make sure I was in the right grades, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and being held back in the places I need to be held back and pushed forward in the other places.
Mhm.
But anyway, we made it through. We
We did it.
accomplished. We did it. We
We
both
got
made it
to
into
university.
college. Yes, yeah, and yeah. So you skipped right into no community college, which yeah, like you said, is pretty standard for a
I
lot
did
of. It was
I did a couple of classes. Yeah,
mhm,
at
okay,
16.
but not the full 2 years like the standard homeschool mode was at the
No.
time.
I
So
mean, I just didn't get my AA, but I did like 16, 17, and then a little bit of
right,
18. Yeah.
okay. So and then you ended up going. You went to UC Davis, is that right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And did you know right off the bat what you wanted to study?
Yeah, I applied to Davis because they had a major that I really, really wanted to do. When I was 12, I started to become crazy about infectious diseases, specifically parasites. And I just read as many books as I could. And then it grew. So it started like macro, like parasites, and then it was bacteria and then viruses. So I was just crazy about all those pathogens. So Davis had a global disease biology major. And I'm like, that's for me. I'm gonna graduate from Davis, and then I'm gonna go to med school, and I'm gonna specialize in tropical medicine, like infectious diseases. And so that was the plan initially.
I mean, you obviously followed through somewhat with the plan, but
Yeah.
where did that plan change?
Oh my gosh. Well, the plan changed when I got to Davis, and I was just like, holy crap, everything is really difficult. It's I think any school in science is difficult, but the UCs are brutal. And the science and math classes, like as most of us know, they're weeder courses and they want you to fail. And so that was like a huge slap in the face for me. And coming into college from being homeschooled, the adjustment was really difficult. And I don't think that I necessarily had a good gauge for like balancing everything. But I think realistically, though, the biggest reason why I just decided not to go down that path was because I was like, I like the pathogens more than the people, and I feel like if you wanna go to med school, you should definitely like people more than you like the diseases and, like, the pathogenesis and stuff like that. So and I had heard that you have to study insurance in med school, and I'm like, "Nah," and it was just too much school. It was too much school.
Yeah,
Too much.
I feel that. So you talk about feeling like maybe a little like under prepared for like being
Mhm.
in a college classroom, and like
Yeah.
was that because I don't know if your parents were this way. My parents were kind of this way for a little while. Was that like you would learn something till you actually got it. And so there was no like the first time I got a D was in college. I had never gotten a D before that because anytime I did get a D, I could just go back and redo it. Because the
Yeah.
way my parents had decided to teach me was, well, you're just going to redo it until you actually know what you're talking about. So when I get to college and all of a sudden it was like, you got a D, well, shoot, that
Mhm.
sucks. And then you get a C in this class and you're like, okay, that's not good. What does that mean? And I'm going and I'm begging with the professor, like, give me extra credit. Was it something
Mhm.
along those? Because I just felt unprepared to like, I didn't understand that it's like once the grade was given, there was really no changing it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think it had to do with a lot of different things, honestly. I think it had to do with the fact that, like, you could work on something as a homeschooler as long as you needed until you got it correctly, which is a great thing to learn, but it's also good to learn, like, "Hey, I need more help for this than I can, like, do myself." So, getting help from a tutor was something that was really hard for me because I was so used to just sitting there and being really perseverant on something, and you just don't have that type of time in college. I also felt really isolated and I felt kind of stupid for asking for help just because I didn't know what level I was at compared to other students. And it was like hard to say like, "Oh, like I don't know this," because I just expected that everybody knew it because there was just no gauge of like, "Oh, what do people know and people like not know?" And then I think the last component of it was just that, I don't feel like I was prepared well in the math and sciences, just the way that my homeschooling journey worked. And I think that's one of the biggest things I like tell people that have kids that are thinking about homeschooling is just like, hey, like if your kid is like mathematically or scientifically inclined, and you are not super familiar with those subjects, like, make sure you're getting a tutor, make sure you're like taking your kid to a class like that's not just taught by you, you know, because teachers are taught how to teach, and so many kids learn differently. And I just feel like I would have benefited a lot if I had been taken out of like the home and taught math and science separately, starting at an earlier age.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you think that had to
mhm.
do mostly with maybe it not being your mom's strong suit of science and math, or was it also a choice of like the curriculum that was used? Where I know for me, I had a lot of faith
Yeah.
based curriculum, and so there's a lot of
Oh,
things in
yeah.
there where it's like when I got to college and all of a sudden I was in college level science, I was like, I was hating my life because I felt dumb too because I was like, I
Yeah.
only know a Christian viewpoint on science. I didn't
Oh,
know
yeah.
what evolution looked like. So was it a mix of those, or mainly one of those?
I think it's a mix of those. I mean, we did have the co-op classes through group solutions, right? Like remember Mr. Panzer is like an oceanographer, and so he has a science background. He was a great science teacher, love him. And I did learn a lot from those classes, but you're right. The apologia textbooks, that are mostly faith-based, I they are good in certain aspects, but they really don't prepare you, I think. And you know, I try to remain neutral too, because I'm like, I was never in public school. Maybe public school doesn't prepare you either. We all struggle in
Right.
college. But I do remember, I think Derry mentioned this, and you might have mentioned this, that like when I got to college and I was learning about evolution, oh my gosh, I just was so quiet in those classes because I was struggling really hard. I'm like, I only have this one perspective, and I'm afraid if I say anything, people are going to be like pointing fingers at me, being like, oh my gosh, like, do you even believe in science? And in retrospect, ugh, I kind of have an issue with those apology textbooks, because I don't think you need to be shoving faith in every single paragraph like they did. I think it has a place, but I think they should be separate and not so intertwined, you know?
Yeah, I feel that. I think I went to a Christian college, so
Mhm.
you did not go to Christian college, so I
Yeah,
can't even
yeah,
imagine that level of like I already felt dumb compared to some of the kids I was with, but like I at least had this kind of like background of like I knew that for the most part, the majority of people who were there also believed the same thing I did, maybe
yeah,
believed kind of the same scientific side of things I did, but yeah, when I got into science class, oh my god, I had science from religion class, and it was kind of what you're talking about. It was like the intersection of science and faith, right? And but he also could separate them and say, hey, when you look at
yeah,
it just scientifically, there's all these different options, and they're all you know hypothesis and theories and whatever else, right? It's like we have all these options over here, and then here's faith, and here's how they intersect, right? And here's how we can
right,
explain this, and it all coexists in the same thing. And I think that was
right.
something that, like you said, with the apologia science books, it's like this is the way, and this is the only way, or at least that's the way it's
Yeah.
presented. This is the way, and
It's
this is the only
literally
way.
Yeah, it's literally just a textbook to teach you how to defend your faith. It's not a specific science textbook, like,
Yes.
um, which I have a problem with, because if you're studying math, you're just studying math. Like, if you're studying science, you should just be studying science. And then you can have your own Bible class, you can have your own apologetics class. And I have no problems. I still don't know where I stand with evolution. Sometimes I'm like, oh, creationism, and then oh, like, the science, super scientific point of view. But yeah.
That's funny. I remember getting to college and I started watching what's the guy's name? Bill Nye the Science Guy. I just
Oh
found Bill Nye
yeah.
videos on YouTube and I just started watching them. And like and then Neil deGrasse Tyson as well, like just like watching their videos to try to understand science from a totally different perspective because I just
Mhm.
grew up. Ken Ham was the science guy. He was the
Yes,
creation
Ken
guy.
Ham.
And my favorite thing, I think it came out when I was in college, but Bill Nye went to the Ark that Ken Ham has built somewhere in
I've
the.
been there.
Have you? I think it's in
Yes.
Kansas, Kentucky. I don't know. It's
Something. I
somewhere.
think it's in Kentucky. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, not super far from me, but yeah, he went and basically they debated as they walked through this museum that is built like the Ark from the
Mhm.
Bible of like, oh yeah, your plaque says this, but it's actually this, right? And they have their back and forth.
Mhm.
And I thought that was so interesting because I was like, I stood with Ken Ham for so long of like, this is
Yeah.
this is the truth. And then to watch things get torn apart, I was like, oh, maybe maybe not. Um,
Right.
kind of a thing. So it's interesting. And I wasn't even a science major, so I can't even imagine being where the majority of my classes are going to be science classes. Um,
Yeah.
where it's just completely different than you were used to.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think a lot of like um my fears going to college was like, oh, I'm gonna be like picked out from the crowd, and like, oh no, like they're gonna know that I was raised thinking this way. And I didn't know what I thought at the time because I was in all these classes. But it was a relatively, I would say, small part of my entire curriculum. Like, once you get through the basic general ed science courses, you get to focus on what you want. So it wasn't a super huge part of my education, but I do remember it being like a big thing when I was like a freshman and a sophomore.
How do you feel about like it, you talk about also feeling kind of singled out in the crowd, whether that's like just you putting that on yourself too, but
Yeah.
like you know, Gary and I talked about like you could smell the homeschooler on you. Like, did you
Oh my
feel like
gosh.
you were that, or I know that sometimes that has to do with just like the social skills that we
Yeah.
had. Which I mean, we were more social kids just in general because we had things like group solutions and achieve to
Oh
fall
yeah.
back on. Uh,
Yeah.
but but yeah, I don't know. Did that play any kind of role for you where you felt just kind of like
Oh
they
yeah.
just
I
know they
definitely
just could
did.
smell it?
I felt it more in community college. I remember everybody else went to Ventura College, and I was like, oh my God, like all my friends are over there, but I have to go to Oxnard College because it's just way closer. I lived in Oxnard. And I had wanted to go start taking math and science classes at the age of 14. And my parents wouldn't let me, and I totally understand where they're coming from. Um, but finally at 16, I was allowed to go, and I was like, yes, I get to take biology, I get to take math, and all these classes that I had been wanting to take chemistry. Um, and I remember very vividly, like sitting in the library and staring at people, just staring at people. I don't know, like, because I just felt like they were so different. Like, it was the first time where I was just like, in an environment by myself and just like supposed to be studying and being like a little mini adult. And I remember this guy, he noticed I was staring at him, and he got one of the library attendants and like pointed at me. I was like, I just like kind of like shook out of it. But I don't know. It was just like a whole new world for me. And it's, I'm making myself sound like I didn't go outside. Like I was in scouts. I was in group solutions. Did a bunch of other stuff, but I think it was because I was by myself. I was like
Right.
16. My lab mates were like 32. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, what the heck?
Yeah. No,
um,
it is very
yeah.
different because well, and especially community college too
Hmm.
is different as well because when you get to a 4-year university, you're with people your age, right? A lot of
Yeah.
times, yeah, and yes, of course, there's the people who are older, and every now and then there's the person who's kind of younger, who's kind of
Hmm.
has gotten in there too. But like for the most part, you're in there with people who are like your own age. Where yeah, like a community college, you get the mom who she didn't finish her degree and now she's in her 30s and
Hmm.
she's trying to make a better life for herself, or she just wants to get her education, or whatever.
Hmm.
And so yeah, you have that vast variety of people that I just wasn't used to. My sister did community college, and she would come home and she would tell about her lab mates and stuff, and then it turned out it was like a 42-year-old man, and I was like,
Oh yeah,
what?
yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I was
Yeah.
just used to everyone around me for my classes was, there was maybe a 3-year age difference between us at
Mhm.
max. And
Mhm.
every very rarely was it like a 10-year age difference.
Oh yeah.
So, um, so yeah, that's kind of funny. I don't know. I feel you though on the needing to stare and needing to kind of like
Gosh.
feel it out a little bit because,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, in addition, I imagine UC Davis is not crazy far from home. Obviously, you were still in California. I moved from California to Illinois, so I
That's
also,
crazy.
in addition to that, I'm stuck there. It's like I'm like it's sink or swim at that point. It's like I make
Mhm.
friends, or I'm just gonna be that weird guy who's
Yeah.
in his room, goes to dinner alone, that kind of thing. Uh, and so just kind of had to push myself to be like, I gotta be out there and I gotta be a part of the group as well. So
Oh yeah. I definitely pushed myself super socially too. And then I was like, oh my gosh, the introvert started coming in, and I remember experiencing like so much social anxiety because the classrooms are huge. They're
yes,
huge at a state school, UC school. And I was just like, that was just another overwhelming part. I don't know if you experienced that too. I don't know how big your school was, but
It was not very big. I think our school
Mhm.
totaled a couple, maybe, I don't know, 1,000 students, a little over 1,000
Mhm.
students. So classroom sizes were not massive. But I also had done that because I strategically I knew that I was going to struggle at a really big school because I needed
Mhm.
a little bit more one-on-one attention with
Mhm.
professors and tutors and stuff like that. Uh, and then I also chose the Christian aspect because that was at the time that was important to me.
Mhm.
And so it was, yeah, it was, I needed that, and I needed classrooms of like 5 people every now and then. And yeah,
Oh,
there was a
wow. Okay,
classroom of
yeah.
50 students
Yeah.
sometimes, but a good number of times it was like max 20 kids in a classroom, which is
Wow.
a lot more
Okay.
manageable, you know?
Yeah.
It felt
Yeah.
like group solutions, right? It was like, okay, this is like a
Yeah.
group solution setting. Um,
Yeah.
and I did want to kind of like backtrack a little bit
Mhm.
because, like you said, you were homeschooled all the way to 16. So that is a long
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
And I obviously you were involved in a lot of the same kind of things I was involved in with Achieve and group solutions and things like that.
Mhm.
Was that always the case, or did you also have years where you just remember feeling like I'm stuck at home? It's also all you ever knew up until
Yeah.
16.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had been in group solutions my whole life, and we started scouting when I was 8. My mom started American Heritage Girls scouting group in our city. And I went to youth group, and I think I've heard this a lot from other homeschoolers too. I do wish I did sports like as a child and all the way throughout because I feel like I would have been really good at them. So I feel like that aspect was definitely missing. But yeah, I felt really isolated, if I'm gonna be honest, my
Okay.
whole childhood. Um, and I just wanted, like, you see people every 2 weeks for group solutions, was it, or something like that?
Yeah.
Just not enough, not enough.
Yeah. I feel that. I get that feeling. And
Also, keep in
it's,
mind,
yeah.
oh, sorry. My siblings are, like, way older than me. My brother's, like, 8 years older than me. I think my sister's, like, 13 years older than me, and my adopted siblings came in when I was around 8 years old, but they went to public school for a while, for a long while.
Wow. Yeah. So that also is yeah, that's a hard shift there too, because like
Mhm.
at least with my siblings or with my sibling, it was a 3 year difference. And even when my
Mhm.
family was adopting, which didn't end up working out, but they were right around our age. Well, we had a 3 year old and then we had like an 11-year old, and I was
Mhm.
like 13 at the time. So, but they were right around our
Wow.
ages as well. But yeah, I'm the oldest, so I never had anybody that was so
Mhm.
drastically further than me in life, you know.
Mhm.
Uh, so that's also like a weird. There's an isolation to that as well, like you said.
Yeah. And, like, I feel like nobody liked coming to Oxnard too, like, there's the people in Ventura, and there was, like, this small group of people in Oxnard, like, okay, Jose, who's my best friend, Jose Lopez, you interviewed Laura,
Yeah.
they lived in Oxnard, and that was, like, oh, my safe place, but there was a period of time where we didn't hang out, actually, and then other than that, there was, like, very few people who lived in Oxnard. I felt like it was just, like, the place that people don't wanna go except for group solution.
You know, I think you're right. I mean, I grew up. I grew up in Ojai, so it was like Oxnard was far, first of all, but
Yes.
then it was in by far it's 30 minutes away. It's like nothing. But it's far, and yeah, and then it was kind of sketchy when I was a
Oh,
kid.
yeah.
So it was not a safe place to just like go all the time. But I don't know. It's a little different now. The last time I was in Oxnard, I was like, it feels so much better here.
I agree. I grew up in a very sketchy neighborhood, so I could totally vouch for that. I understand why people didn't wanna come, but I was still like, "Guys, please come, like, I'm lonely."
Yeah. No, it's funny that you say you grew up in a sketchy neighborhood. I literally grew up next to a drug dealer, watched him get busted, OD, all that kind of like just,
Wait.
I'm like stuff happened in my neighborhood too. So it's not like Ojai was all that much safer, to be very honest. Uh, but yeah.
That's hilarious.
Anyway, but one of the things you brought up to me when we were kind of pre-interview and chatting about topics was that you were a part of the video production team.
Oh,
What that
yeah.
was at Group Solutions, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay, tell me a little bit about that because I never did that. Um,
Okay.
but I remember watching somebody's short video at some
Oh,
point.
no. Yeah, we were a group, we were a club, but it was technically a class at Group Solutions, and it was, Mrs. Burns's class, so, that whole Burns family clan was totally involved in that, and, there was people like Emily Aldrich and Colin Summers and Caleb Savard, and we took this class for years. I think I started when I was, like, 12, and then I stopped when I left, so, like, at 15, 16, and it was one of the best experiences at homeschooling was making films with my friends. We would just spend hours, like, having film days and doing the weirdest scripts. We'd all write scripts, and, I was a makeup, person, I was a costume person, I did a bunch of different things, I did editing. It was a great group and fun stuff. Very embarrassing films, though. They're not good, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, I feel that. I only ever made one movie, and that was
Mhm.
for my mom taught a uh I'm trying to remember if it was American literature or what it was, but we made a full-length movie of a
Was that, like,
play,
the
and
3-hour one?
the 3-hour movie that Carrie and I talked about on our episode. Yeah, that was yeah, super cringy. So, you guys were way better at editing and doing all that kind of stuff than we ever were. But yeah, I forgot who all was in that group. So yeah, when you brought up names, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember these things
Yeah.
now.
Colin and I were like we were, like, doing stuff together, Emily, Kira Hatton, we were Nick Schneider. These were, like, my closest friends. We just have such good memories together, and we were so serious. That's the thing. We were serious. I was looking through my emails the other day, and we'd have email chains, we'd have spreadsheets. I would tell this person to bring that, and someone would tell me to do this, and we were, like, on it, especially Colin, man. Colin was just and he's still like that today, I'm pretty sure, just that
Yeah,
director, producer mindset, you know?
yeah. Well, Colin now works in the film in the
Yeah.
TV film industry. So yeah, I'm trying to get him on the show because yeah, I want to pick his brain on all that stuff. But the last I talked to him, I was like, your job sounds awesome. Uh, But yeah, well, that's super cool. I'm glad. It feels like every homeschool kid kind of had. There was some overlapping of like obviously a lot of us had similar extracurriculars,
Mhm.
but then there was also like these really unique ones as well. And
Yeah.
I know another one that we shared was of course swing dancing, and you
Mhm.
continue to swing dance to this day. And
Yeah.
I told you before we got on, I'm pretty sure you've far surpassed what I could ever do. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to remember, was I ever your swing dance instructor?
I honestly I don't remember did the dances that well. Like, I didn't remember liking it, like, liking dancing that much, and I didn't remember the basic steps. Like, I started last April, and I was, like, at 0. So I think I mostly remembered, like, the social interactions and, like, the pizzazz of getting ready for dance, but you definitely probably were my swing instructor, to be honest.
It's very possible. I know I was for your 2 younger siblings. I remember that.
Yeah?
I also was going through emails, and I had an email chain from your mom asking if they could come even though at the time they weren't homeschool kids or something like that, and I was like, "Yeah,
Oh, so you
sure."
definitely were. You definitely were.
It's very possible. So yeah, you forgetting is not on me though. I must not have been super memorable, but
Well, I just don't remember, like, the actual dancing itself. I remember the
mhm.
dresses getting measured and, like, boys being shoved towards me and just having a good time, like, all the other stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I I have such fond memories of those. Stock hops were definitely my personal favorite,
Mhm.
just because I loved like the greaser 50s style
Oh my
a lot.
gosh. Yeah. I have a picture that I found of me in a sock hop dress with, like, a crinoline twirling, and it was at Poinsettia Pavilion, and I'm like, "Oh, that's such a good memory." Like
I love it. I love it. You have to send it to me so I can
okay.
see it. Um,
Yeah.
but it's cool that you're doing that now too, as like or you've picked it back up
Mhm.
and uh, are doing classes, or just is it just like a group that does it now? Like,
Oh, yeah. It's like my whole life now, to be honest. Like, I work to make money so that I can dance all the time. I started last April, and I am now on some different teams. So I do collegiate shag as well, which is like under the umbrella of East Coast. I do some Balboa. I'm not good at it though. And Lindy Hop primarily, but I'm on two different teams. I have an official dance partner now. We've competed and we won a medal, which is really cool. And I have some events that I'm flying to soon, and I'm hoping to compete in those. Like, I really want to be competitive. It's something that I love a lot, and um, yeah, I do it every day, honestly. It's so fun. It's so fun. Yeah,
it is, yeah. No, I've been wanting to maybe like pick it back up again because
you
yeah,
should.
I have such fond memories of it, and it's cool to hear that you're like competing because I know that was a thing for me for a while where I wanted to get to that
Mhm.
level. And I did smaller competition stuff, but to get to a level to compete would be so fun. I mean, Taylor Bozarth and I would watch videos of competitions to like learn new steps and uh,
Mhm.
all kinds of
That's
stuff like
so
that.
cool.
So anyway,
Yeah,
but oh man, I love that you're doing that. That's like fantastic. So
yeah.
I know we've kind of jumped around quite a bit.
Mhm,
We did like a brief, and then we went to college, and then we went back to grade school and early high
mhm,
school. But now I want to kind of jump past college and
mhm.
uh graduation and entering into the job sphere and like what you're doing today,
Mhm.
and what's like on the horizon. So, you know,
I graduated in December of 22, I want to say. I don't know why I can't remember exactly, but I graduated with my bachelor's in entomology and my minor in art history, and I tagged the minor on last minute, and I feel like that was like the best decision I made in my whole college career, in addition to like switching my major to entomology from global disease biology. I had so much fun taking those art history classes, and it really fulfilled like the creative side of me that was lacking because I was taking all the science and math courses. Um, so I lived in Davis for a little bit, and I started working for Placer County, which is like a county above Sacramento. And I worked for their mosquito abatement district, also as a laboratory technician. And then I saw a job opportunity for Sacramento Yellow, and I'm like, that's way closer, because at the time I was commuting like 40, 50 minutes, and I was like, this is not sustainable.
ooh,
Like,
yeah.
yeah. Also working at like 7, 6 a.m. And being a dancer and then commuting like that was just really difficult. So and it was also a salary increase, so that was like, "Oh, okay, I'm definitely gonna try to get this job." So I've been working for, Sacramento Yolo County for since December, and that's been going really well. And right now, I'm looking to get a state job. Um, I think that's just the natural progression of where my career is taking me. I love the reliability of having the county benefits. They're the same as the state benefits. I have a pension, I have really good insurance, I have reliable like wage increases, and it might not be as much pay as like a private place, but I just love the stability of having a county job. Um, so I'm hoping to kind of break into like the agricultural side of pest control or something like that with the state.
That's super cool. Yeah. No, those yeah, those county jobs are sweet. I worked for the county in high
Yeah,
school. I worked for a library,
very
and
cool.
yeah, and so yeah, I had like same deal. I even at whatever that was 16, 17, it was like pension, and
Mhm.
I didn't work enough to get full benefits, but I had some of them and I still get mail about it. But that's awesome. That's awesome to hear, and like uh it's cool to catch up with people and hear, because I feel like so many people have such interesting jobs now and things that I would have, I mean, I didn't know you super well, but just also things that I would have
Mhm.
never thought of even being a job. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like I don't think of
yeah.
Mosquito abatement as a job title that somebody would have, right? So,
Yeah.
um, so that's like so interesting. And I was asking you before we came on, which you told me was probably not the case, but I was asking if down the line, if we would be able to pull a Jurassic Park and use mosquitoes to like clone different animals and things in the future. But it sounds like that's a negative on that.
I mean, I am not into genetics, like, that's above me for sure, but I do I mean, I told you about how I worked for a vector genetics lab in college, and so their primary goal at the time was to fight malaria using, genetically modified mosquitoes, and some of the mosquitoes that I took care of in the lab had a jellyfish gene spliced into them, and that made them fluoresce. And so, I mean, weird things can happen with genetics these days. So, who am I to say what the
We'll
future is going
see.
to look like?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see. Yeah, we're gonna have like mega mosquitoes that not too far from now that are just like the size of your face or something. Um,
Yeah, I mean, California, one of the things with my job is that we deal with invasive mosquitoes. So right now we have invasive Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus invading California. And they're not large mosquitoes, but they're very bright and boldly colored. And the reason why we're worried about them is because they transmit things like dengue. So I mean, mosquitoes are just a fun thing.
that's so I would never know that aside from you just telling me that. I would never
Oh
even
my
think to look that
gosh.
up of like
You want to hear my one of my craziest mosquito stories?
yes.
Okay. So in college, I told you I worked for that vector genetics lab, and it was during the pandemic. And my main job was taking care of mosquito colonies. So you have these insectaries, which are these temperature, humidity controlled rooms. And you go in there, and there's cages of just thousands of mosquitoes in each cage. And, my job is to feed them and to make sure they're doing well and mating and like all the life cycle is being complete and stuff like that. But one year, the lab couldn't go to Africa to get Anopheles freeborni in order to bring them back to Davis and do genetic testing on them. And so we're like, I wasn't going to go to Africa. I'm too low on the food chain for that. But my supervisor was like, okay, since we can't go and get these Anopheles from Africa, what is the similar mosquitoes that we have in the Davis area? And so they're like, the rice field mosquitoes, Anopheles freeborni, are similar to Anopheles gambiae, which are in Africa. And so we're like, okay, we're going to try to go collect wild Anopheles in the rice field, bring them back, and try to get them jump started into our colonies, like try to make them colony mosquitoes. And that sounds fine and dandy. Like, what? You just go out and trap mosquitoes, you bring them back, you put them in the lab. But getting them to breed in the lab is super difficult. Like, the in colony mosquitoes have been breeding in lab for generations upon generations upon generations. Like, you literally just give them blood after they've mated and they'll lay eggs like that. But yeah, these wild mosquitoes would just not lay eggs for us, which was a huge problem. And so they're like, okay, we're gonna need you to forcibly mate them. Like, we're down to our last option. We need to do something. And so, oh my gosh, like when I tell the story, I'm like, wow, that's wild. Forcibly mating is exactly what it sounds like. You have to forcibly mate mosquitoes. And so basically, you get a tiny little vacuum, like the size of a pencil tip, and you stick the female mosquito on there. And then you take a male mosquito and you kind of like introduce them together. Like, you're like, okay, it's sexy time. Like, you have to get the male started because the males have claspers on the end of their abdomen. So they have to start trying to clasp. So you need to like get, the antenna, like the pheromones in the room. I don't know. And then after you do that, after your sexy introduction, you have to, and also you have to knock out the male at some point. I can't remember. You have to like put CO2 or like put him in the fridge for a little bit. But anyways, after you knock them out, you have to cut off their legs, cut off their wings, and cut off their head, and then mate them. And if you're really good at your job, you can mate multiple females to one male. Um, I don't think I was ever that good, but yeah, that's the story I like to tell people. Where I'm like, entomology is really weird. Like sometimes you just have to do crazy things. And the worst part about it is like it didn't even work. Like they didn't really lay eggs.
You did
Like
it
they
for
were
science.
mated. Yeah, we definitely mated them. Like I was a
Yeah.
mosquito matchmaker. I mated them, but they didn't lay eggs still, and that's because they were picky about where they wanted to lay eggs. So
Oh my gosh. Well, I think you just gave me the title of the episode, which is like mosquito sex ed, or something along those lines. Um, because wow, that's a
yeah.
job. That's crazy. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I just learned a heck of a lot about mosquitoes
Oh
just now.
yeah.
Um,
One of
so
the other
yeah, I hope
really
you put on like the slow jams in the background. You lit a couple candles. You made it happen. It sounds like it was a lot of fun, to be honest.
I thought about it. It was fun, but it was also really morbid when I started thinking about what I was doing, you know? Like I kind of had to like dissociate a little bit, like compartmentalize. Um I do think one of the cooler parts though about the reproductive cycle is I was able to take out the spermatheca out of the females and see the sperm flowing inside of them. Um, so that was really cool. Like it was just under a normal microscope. I saw the sperm flowing inside of yeah.
Wow. Bugs are fascinating.
Yeah, that's why
Like,
I
and
studied them. They're so cool.
yeah, and I don't even mean that like sarcastically or anything. Like, this is legitimately. I feel like I could listen to you talk about this all day. Like it's legitimately fascinating to me. Because yeah, I was not a science person, and I hated like biology and all that kind of stuff. So it just like, but that was when I was a kid. Now I'm coming around to it. So hearing it again, it's like,
Yay.
wow, okay, that's interesting and a necessary uh process right now to kind of like figure out, to learn, right? We that's again the whole point of science, right, is to further our education and
Yes.
and further this planet and make it go farther, right? So that's such an interesting job. Oh my gosh. And keep up the good work, because that's I don't know what else to say. So far, I think you have the coolest job of anybody who's been on the show.
I mean that was in college. I do more mundane things now to be quite honest, but I keep those memories with me.
Oh man, yeah. I can't get over it. Okay, I just have visuals now in my head
Oh
of.
yeah. I have wild stories, but I'll keep it to a minimum.
um. So you kind of touched on this earlier. Was I always ask people whether they're going to have kids down the line, or if they have a homeschool family, kind of approach them of like and ask them like, would you homeschool your kids? Would you recommend people homeschool their kids? And you kind of said tutoring is a must when you have a child who is maybe more mathematically or scientifically inclined. Uh, but in general, I didn't know if you had any other thoughts that you wanted to expand on that with, of if you've given that any thought at all, of whether you would
Yeah.
homeschool your kids or you recommend it for people.
I like go back and forth. I have emphatically said for the last couple years like no, I definitely would not. And but my brother's had a kid and I've heard him talk about it, and I don't really have like a finger on where public schools are right now, except for that I've just heard really bad things. I think ultimately, though, I don't trust myself to give like a really comprehensive education. Like, I am not an expert in math and science and history and all of these fields. I think maybe up to middle school, I could definitely manage, or even maybe into middle school. But after that, I would probably consider private school. Um, but that's so expensive. And I think it also kind of depends on whatever my partner wants. Um, I think the last couple of people that I've dated have been like, "Oh my gosh, I would love to homeschool kids." Like, they've been so excited about it, and, you know, I have all these traumas where I'm like, "No, but they'll end up like this, and they'll end up like this," but then I have to remember, like, hey, public school kids, like, have their own set of things that they had to deal with, and, like, I have no idea what that experience is like, so I really go back and forth. I think it depends on, like, where you live too. So many variables.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. I think the ultimate thing and is always just like you got to figure out what works best for your kid, you know. And I think there's
Exactly.
experimentation that goes into that of like maybe you do a year homeschooling, maybe you do a couple years, then you go to public school for a couple
Yes.
years, and you figure out what works for your kid. And everybody's different, you know. And there's so many options now of just, I mean, there was options when we were kids, but there's so many
Mhm.
options even more now of like what you can do when it comes to educating your child. And I like that. I like what you said about kind of being self-aware of like, I know where my strengths lie and I know where my weaknesses lie. And so when it comes to the weakness area, I need help. Let me seek out that
Mhm.
help. That's huge, you know. And having done it, I think you know what you would probably do different from your parents,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
areas that you would help your kid that maybe your parents just didn't know. You know, that's what my parents always tell. They're like, we didn't know what we didn't know. You know, um,
Yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah. They just tried
you
their
know,
best.
exactly. They had to do. You know, they tried their best, and you know, and hey, we turned out okay.
Yeah.
We college graduates. We have
We have
careers.
jobs.
We have
Yeah.
jobs. We pay our own bills.
Yeah.
You know, we made it, and that's true for the majority of our
Yeah.
friends. Is like we all made it, and we're all okay. And yeah, I tell myself all the time. I'm like, it's all gonna be okay. Like you know,
Yeah.
and
I think you make a really good point about each child is different because I look at my siblings, and we've talked about this before, like, we all had such a different experience, and I even like to say that we all had different parents. Like, none of us experienced the parent the same way as another person experienced the parent. And so I think one of the other things that is really important is asking the child what they want. I don't remember being asked, "Hey, have you ever wanted to go to public school? Like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this?" And I think one of the reasons might have been because I was so introverted and so into my books and my hobbies that they just were like, "Oh, she loves this. She'll be, fine with this." But because I didn't know what public school was, like, I never had the option to make an informed choice, um, and honestly, public school was kinda demonized a little bit, like, it was like, "Oh, all those public schoolers," and, so I think just more education on, like, the different school types and allowing your kid to have a voice in what they think is best for themselves.
that's an interesting thing you brought up. I hadn't even thought about the demonization of public school kids because like I remember joking about that with people, but also I think a lot of homeschoolers didn't know that I had gone to public school. And so I never truly thought that about public school kids. I just, you know, would I just played into it because everybody else was doing it. You don't want to be the odd man out kind of a thing. But that's an interesting idea there. I hadn't heard that verbalized like that in a while. So, of like, the public school kids were kind of looked at as like, well, you're kind of lesser than.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm all of the non-Christian ideas, right? Like you're gonna be swayed or you're going to there's all these things that exist. And to be fair, like I believe my parents kept me out of public school for a good reason. Like, I might not be aware of it now, but maybe the area that we lived in just didn't have good public schools and that just was not a feasible option. But um yeah, definitely was demonized in more ways than one.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I for sure see that. I actually recently asked my mom why they homeschooled me, and she told me that since I was a baby, my grandmother had been bugging her and been like, "Hey, I think you should homeschool." You know, they just I don't know. She had just kind of always been putting that in my mom's ear, and it wasn't until I was in second grade, my sister was going into kindergarten, and or preschool or whatever, and my mom was like, okay, let's just give it a shot. And it had to do partly with the schools in the area. We just moved. The schools in the area were not, she didn't love them, And so I
Mhm.
think she just kind of thought, maybe let's just give it a shot. We'll see how it goes. If it's absolutely terrible, we can always go back, you know?
Mhm.
Um, but it was a struggle for her because she was like, I'm giving up my freedom because both of my kids are about to go to
Yeah.
school. I'm giving up my freedom to educate them, which is, I
Yeah.
mean, being a mom is a whole job in itself. Being a mom plus a teacher is, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. So
Yeah.
I am having some parents on at some point, so I'm gonna get
So
some different
excited.
perspectives on
Yeah.
that one as well. And I am excited. Your brother's coming on to
Oh my
talk to
gosh,
me,
he
so I
told
am
me about
excited.
it.
Yeah, I'm
We had
excited
a
to get
whole
his perspective.
conversation.
Very cool. Well, Elizabeth, is there anything you want to leave the people with? Anything we didn't cover? Any last memories that have been unlocked while we've been chatting? This has been It's been awesome to catch up with you.
Yeah, no, I thank you for having me. I've loved this podcast series, as you know, and I've always wanted to be on a podcast. I love podcasts so much, and it's been such a solace for me to hear other homeschoolers experience. Like, homeschooling is a really unique thing in itself, but hearing from homeschoolers that like lived in the same area in the same group, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, thank you. Like, you went through this too. We're not alone. Um, I think last words, shout out to my mom. You're right. They did sacrifice so much for us. She has been my number one supporter all the way up through college and even now. And she worked a job to get help me get through college. And she's just always been very crazy about whatever I'm crazy about. And so, yeah, I love you, mom.
Yes, that's right. We love you, Mrs. Slagboom. Awesome. Well, thank you once again for coming on. It's been amazing catching up with you. And for all the rest of you listeners, do the things that you normally do: subscribe, follow, like, all those types of things. I also want to hear from you. I have an email account. It's EXHS club at gmail.com. It'll all be in the show notes and linked up there. But if you got questions, if you've got people you want to hear on the show, whatever, concerns, compliments, all of the things, let me know. I would love to hear from you. So yeah, this has been the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. Until next week, we'll see ya.